Okay, so I will start by presenting the building and ductwork airtightness in France, the national trends and requirements. And to start, I will give a brief introduction of the context of the French regulation in France. The building airtightness has been taken into account in the French building regulation for almost 20 years. As you can see here, the evolution since 2000 till today, the evolution in blue of the building energy regulation, and in orange, the evolution of the energy performance labels, F-Energy in France. And what is important to notice is there is two major dates in France that have profoundly changed the markets of building airtightness in France. In 2008, with the energy performance label F-Energy, that have set for the first time in France minimum requirements for the building airtightness with a mandatory justification. And then in 2012, these requirements have been introduced in the energy performance regulations with minimum requirements for residential buildings with the limit value and the mandatory requirement for the justification of the results. And in the recent regulations, these requirements has been reconducted reinforced by introducing some requirements for non-residential buildings. Before presenting the requirements, I will define first the French airtightness indicator. In France, we use the air permeability indicator called Q4PA SURF, which is the specific leakage rate at 4 Pascal per unit of the envelope surface area, excluding the lowest floor area. Well, in France, it's quite different from other countries, especially for the use of the reference pressure of 4 Pascal, whereas in almost all countries, 50 Pascal is used. This choice was made because 4 Pascal is considered as representative of the difference pressure under natural conditions. In order to have an idea of the order of magnitude of this indicator regarding more typical indicators used in other countries like QE4 or N50. For example, QE4 is almost 5.2 times Q4PA SURF. For N50, it will depend on the building capacity. For a typical single-family house, it will be around 4.2. And for multifamily buildings, around 1.8. And for non-residential buildings, it's around 3. And now, regarding the requirements of the energy performance regulation in France, well, for new residential buildings, since 2013, there is a mandatory requirement with a limit air tightness level. It is of 0.6 cubic meter per hour per square meter for single-family houses and 1 for multifamily buildings. And recently, with the new regulation, since 2020, there are some penalties that should be applied in some cases. In particular, when the measurement is performed on a sample of dwellings, the final result must be multiplied by 1.2. And if the test is performed before the completion of all work impacting the envelope air permeability, the final results must be incremented by 0.3 cubic meter per hour per square meter. In new non-residential buildings, there is also a recent requirement since 2022 with a limit air tightness level for new schools and office buildings of less than 3,000 square meter, and the limit value is 1.7 cubic meter per hour per square meter. For the other non-residential buildings, we still don't have a minimum requirement, so we can use either a default value, but you can also use a better than default value, but in this case, it must be justified. As I said in the introduction, in France, we have the requirements of the energy performance regulation, but also we have incentive measures thanks to the energy performance labels F-Energy, which sets higher requirements for buildings. And this labels requires for new single-family houses a limit value of 0.4 instead of 0.6. And for the multifamily buildings, a limit value of 0.8 when the measurement is performed by sampling. For non-residential buildings, there is no target value. However, there is a mandatory test of airtightness for all non-residential buildings of less than 3,000 square meters. In addition to the requirements regarding to the limit value of the airtightness, an important point was introduced in the energy regulation is the need to justify the results. And the results of respect of the limit value must be justified either by an airtightness test or by the application of a certified qualified management approach on building airtightness. The airtightness tests also must be performed by a qualified third-party tester. The qualification, there is a qualification scheme that has been defined since 2007, and which it is managed today by a national certification body called Qualibat. This qualification scheme includes a state-approved training with examination and sufficient testing experience to obtain the qualification. And also in this qualification scheme, there is a yearly follow-up checks with the analysis of some reports and provision, and most important, the provision of a professional standard form giving the result of all tightness measurements that have been performed during the year. Thanks to this standard form that we call professional register, this data can be collected in a national database of building airtightness that help us to analyze the evolution of airtightness in France. And the measurement must be performed according to the, of course, standard ISO 9972. And in addition, there is a national guideline called FD P57 784 that sets some additional requirements. So the test is performed according to the fan pressurization method, and the measurements are performed according to the method 3 of the standard. So only the ventilation openings included in the energy performance calculation are sealed, and all windows, doors, and trapdoors on the envelope are closed. For multifamily buildings of more than 500 square meters, there is the possibility either to perform the measurement on the whole building or to use a sampling method. And the sampling method consists of measuring 3 dwellings for, in the case of buildings with less than 30 dwellings, or 6 dwellings in the other cases. And the dwellings must be located on the first, intermediate, and the higher levels. So to conclude on the first part regarding the building airtightness in France, you can see here some key figures issued from the analysis of the national database. So today there is there's almost 850 qualified testers in France to perform building airtightness measurements. And in the national database, we have today more than 500,000 measurements. With more than 60,000 tests performed each year. We can see on these 2 figures the evolution of the number of measurements regarding the residential buildings and non-residential buildings. And you can see, thanks to the regulatory requirements, that the number of measurements has quickly increased since 2010. Sorry. And also we can see that the results of the airtightness of buildings has significantly improved across the years. We can observe that 96% of tests are performed in new residential buildings. This is due to the mandatory requirements that apply only to residential buildings. And in new single-family houses, the yearly median air permeability is stabilized around 0.4 cubic meters per hour per square meter, lower than the mandatory value of 0.6. And in multifamily buildings, the yearly median value is 0.64, lower than the target value of 1. In non-residential buildings, 93% of the tested buildings are better than the default values.
Thank you, Bassam. I will continue presenting the French situation, moving to the ductwork airtightness. So good morning, everyone. And in France, the regulation regarding ductwork airtightness as follows the same dynamic that for envelope, but with a small delay in time. So you can see here that we have the same impact of the implementation of F-Energy label on ductwork airtightness with the possibility to use better than default value with justification. The control of the ventilation system has been required by F-Energy label since 2012. And it's a new regulation in France for ventilation inspection since last year. So we also now have the mandatory inspection for ventilation system for all new residential buildings thanks to this new regulation. So regarding the ductwork airtightness, we can use in the EP calculation class A, B, or C in the condition that a test is performed to justify the class. If no test is performed, a default value is implemented in the EP calculation, which corresponds to 2.5 the class A. So the tests and the obtain of the minimum class are mandatory only for energy labels now. And the justification is like for the envelope, either airtightness measurement of the ductwork performed by the qualified tester using the same qualification scheme, or a quality management approach. But so the national qualifications team use a French standard, which you have the reference here. And as for envelope, it includes the training, examination, and testing experience. And we also put in place the same yearly follow-up, including register, like for envelope, so we can collect all the information in a national database. So some key figure regarding ductwork airtightness here. For now, we have 133 qualified testers for ductwork airtightness. We have collected almost 9,000 tests in the national database, so we don't have the same figure for the envelope because the tests are not mandatory in the regulation yet. Now we can collect more than 1,000 tests per year, so you can see in this graph the results collecting during these different tests. Most of the tests are performed on non-residential buildings. And you can see here that for residential building, the class A is obtained most of the time, and for non-residential building, class B is the most often obtained class. So now, since last year, we have the new regulation in France, the environmental regulation 2020. And in this regulation, we have a new requirement regarding the inspection of ventilation systems that have been introduced. This requirement is mandatory for all new residential buildings, so single-family and multi-family dwellings, that are equipped with mechanical ventilation system, either single exhaust or balanced ventilation system, which is the case for a very great majority of residential buildings in France. This inspection must be performed by the qualified inspector, so we have been able to create a new qualification scheme, a third one regarding the ventilation inspection. And this inspection is based on the Prevent protocol that was being included in the new regulation, and it includes 3 different steps. A pre-inspection, which is the analysis of document and preparation of the institute audit, so to verify that the design is in accordance with the regulation. Then the tester will go on site and perform ventilation diagnostics, which is only visual checks, and then it will perform ventilation measurements, which includes flow rate or air pressure measurement depending on the type of systems. The ductwork airtightness is not mandatory in the regulation, but if in the EP calculation a better value than the default class is used, then the test becomes mandatory. So here you can have a synthesis of all this presentation. So you have all the requirements and the limit value for building air tightness, ductwork air tightness, and ventilation system. So you have in blue the EP and area regulation requirements. So that are most of the case for residential buildings. You have the possibility of the regulations, that is to use a better than the default value. And in this case, the justification is mandatory. And we also put here the requirement of the Energy Plus label that are the label that are used to, before regulation, to test on site what is possible to do on our building in France. So thank you all for your attention, and Bassam and I are both available to answer your questions.